We now welcome Paddy Tighe, Professor of Molecular Immunology, to tell us about the Bioinformatics course here at Nottingham. So welcome to you. First of all, could you start by telling me what is bioinformatics and how does it integrate with other scientific disciplines?
Well, bioinformatics is really draws together biology, it draws computational sciences and information sciences together so that we can take complex biological data, which we're generating in vast amounts now, and actually start to make sense of it in terms of what it actually means. So in terms of what we do as bioinformaticians, not only do we use existing software that's already out there, but we also want people to design new software to ask new questions, things that haven't been previously looked at. So it's a combination of software design, software use, data storage, data management and curation, so that we can get insight into biological processes of all sorts.
So why is this important, would you say, in today's society?
We generate masses of data looking at different types of biological subjects, but in today's society, really, you can put it down to things like healthcare, where the data that we generate from people's genetics and that we generate when we sample people's blood, etc., when we look, then that can be used to help us diagnose patients. It helps us understand where diseases are, how diseases are generated, helps us design new drugs. If we look away from the health sciences, then you can also look at bioinformatics being used to understand the environment around us, the plants, the fungi, the bacteria, and how those are changing with perhaps things like climate change in polluted soils, saline environments, so that we can understand better what adaptations organisms have to make, which could be quite useful for us in the future if we have to make those adaptations in our own crops and animals.
So are you doing any real-world applications on this course?
Yes, there is a project on the course. There are two projects. There's a group project and then there is an individual project later on in the course where students are allocated to a supervisor who has a biological problem to solve that requires a bioinformatics approach. So we give people, and these, in terms of supervisors, these people may be in the medical area looking at viruses and viral variants. They may be in more looking at plants. They may be looking at ecological changes, so studying environmental DNA to find out what's in a particular environment. They may be looking at the relationship between different species and their genomes to understand what those species, how those species have changed over an evolutionary period of time.
And can you share with me any breakthroughs or research achievements in this field that have come from the university?
Yes, well, there was one that's it's a bit old now, but it's still a really interesting one, which is Professor Matt Luce and his team here, who Matt Luce teaches on the course. They use a specific type of next generation sequencer, which allows you to sequence long pieces of DNA, and in 2018, they actually set the record for the longest piece of DNA ever sequenced. It was to prove a point, really, that these machines are able to sequence thousands upon thousands of base pairs of DNA in one go, which most sequencers do not do. They look at very short pieces of DNA, but they assemble a genome from them. The longer pieces you can look at, the easier it is to assemble some genomes because of where they've got repeated sequences in the genome. You can't really, short sequences don't allow you to reassemble them. But they managed to do 2.3 million base pairs on a machine which would fit in the palm of your hand, which was quite an achievement, and it was reported at the time. Other things we've done recently include things like we have members of staff who've been studying whale genomics to understand what adaptations whales went through to actually return to the sea, get huge, deal with cancer, make them more resistant to cancer, etc. We also have people looking at environmental DNA so that we can look at biodiversity in both the local and other environments, and we've got people looking at adaptations of plants, as I've said, to difficult environments, because they're really going to teach us a lot about what we're going to need for the future.
And when students are on these courses, what are the sort of skills that they're going to really learn and develop?
Okay, so the first part of the first module on the course involves them. We will teach them to become proficient in some programming languages. So we'll do Python, which is a very popular program language now. We'll teach them how to use the R statistical programming language, because those two can be tied together so that you can operate Python code with R code, etc. R is a great way to be able to visualize your data. And also it allows you to do statistical analyses. So often we get lots of data, but at the end of the day, we can't just say there's a difference. We have to say, is that a significant difference statistically? So they will learn how to do those languages. They'll also learn how to use the Unix command line. And that's important because one of the skills they do get or they get a chance to play with Ada, who is our high performance computing service. And that's for when they have tasks which can't be done on a laptop computer. It will not be able to cope with the amount of data and the range of the analysis. So we try and teach them that. They get taught about genomics and phylogeny. They get taught about sequence annotation and how we understand DNA sequences more fully. They have projects which involve them sometimes looking at the expressed genome, which is when a gene is expressed, cells are dynamically expressing different genes. And so that is quite important in understanding things like how cells differentiate, what happens in, say, something like a tumor, what happens as a seed develops into a plant, what happens when a bacteria becomes adapted to a new environment. So they learn about all of these, but there's a lot of hands-on skill there. We get them on computers very early so that they build their own skills, so that at the end of the day, they're not just knowing how to use things, but they know how to write their own programs to do different things. Yeah.
And you mentioned, research there.
Yes.
Do they get to undertake any research projects on this course?
Yes, they do. The final individual research project is one, as I said, with a supervisor, and we find someone who's got an interesting biological problem. We ask supervisors to give us options, and then the students can be allocated or can choose an option, and then they will have a period of roughly 3 months where their entire focus is that project, and they'll have the data for the project. The supervisor may already have the data, or they'll be generating it, and they are then tasked with the final sort of pulling that data together and teasing apart the important parts of it and relating that to the original biological question. So we do have a great mixture of projects, from looking at distributions of organisms in environments, invasive species, looking at how they can form hybrids with a closely related species, but ultimately take over an area because of their vigor. We have people looking at things like just individual molecules and how sort of ribosomes are needed to take your RNA sequences that you get from the genome and turn them into proteins that do a function, but looking at the adaptations within ribosome sequences that allow them to specialize in particular tasks. So we do have a lot of very varied projects for people.
And finally, what are some of the jobs that you can go into after undertaking this master's?
Just
a couple.
Okay, a couple of them are, obviously there's the route to go and do a PhD and go further in science itself. The other option is to go down the route of industry. The pharmaceuticals industry are very interested in bioinformaticians, because if you're making a new drug, you need to have all of that biological data so that you can understand how that drug is affecting a particular set of cells. Environmental agencies and governments, because if you're building new houses, you need to check that the site doesn't have any endangered species on it. So you can actually check that by getting DNA from the local pond, and then you can analyse to see within that DNA, is there a great crested newt DNA, in which case you have to come up with a plan to mitigate any building that you do. So the world is pretty much, and that's only doing bioinformatics. People also go down just the data analysis route, and they go and work for companies that don't have a relationship with bioinformatics as such, but they're very interested in people who know how to deal with large data sets. So it's pretty much an open field for people.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Paddy.
My pleasure.